This morning we'll be discussing Canto 4, Chapter 13. And sorry I missed you yesterday, the wrap up of the Dhruva Maharaj story. I was engaged with the devotees from China during your morning class yesterday. So a little summary of Chapter 13 begins with the conclusion of Chapter 12. The conclusion of Chapter 12 is after Dhruva Maharaj goes to Dhruvaloka at the end of a long period of time of ruling the kingdom of his father, and his mother goes with him, etc. And there's some glories described of the benefits of hearing the story of Dhruva Maharaj. A very interesting little section is there at the end where Narada Muni, because Dhruva is his disciple, he's very happy that he's attained this stage of spiritual perfection. It says he went to a yajna where the prachetas were, and he recited 3 verses glorifying Dhruva. So chapter 13 begins with a question. Maharaj Parikshit wants to know who are the prachetas and what's the story with the prachetas. So it's mentioned in chapter 12, again in the beginning of chapter 13, and we don't hear the answer to that question until chapter 24. Because in chapter 24, the story of the prachetas is told in some detail. And then we hear again a later canto about the prachetas. So they play an important role. So why are we hearing about this in chapter 12 when there isn't a description until chapter 24 and then again in 6th canto? So a few things. This is, the chapter summary time. Before we do the chapter summary, let's step back several steps and go to Canto 2, Chapter 10. In Canto 2, Chapter 10, the first 2 verses are spoken by Shukadeva Goswami. And in those 2 verses, Shukadeva Goswami identifies the 10 topics that are included in the Srimad Bhagavatam or included in a Mahapurana. So what does that mean? There's Mahapuranas and there's Puranas and there's Upapuranas. Purana means history. And the Mahapuranas have 10 topics. So those 10 topics are identified. The same list of 10 topics, slight change in the Sanskrit, but spoken by Sutta Goswami, 12th canto. 10 topics in Srimad Bhagavatam. And one of those topics, Sarga and Visarga. Sarga is the creation of Vishnu, and Visarga is the sub-creation of Brahma. After Vishnu does what he does, what does Brahma do? Those are the first 2 of the 10 topics. And then comes Manvantara, or the lineages that come from Manu. So going back to cantos 2 and 3, we hear some details about Sarga and Visarga. The sub-creation of Brahma particularly gets a lot of attention. And after the sub-creation of Brahma, what happens? He builds the universe, and then what happens? He has to fill up the universe. Or not has to, that's what he does. And he does that through Prajapatis. Praja means offspring, and Pati means father or lord. The Prajapatis produce offspring, and they don't just produce of their own species. These Prajapatis have power. They're empowered to produce all species. That's the Vedic conception of variety of species. It's not Darwinian chemical evolution idea. So the species are produced, but before that section where the species are produced, because that comes in the 6th canto, we find the first of the Manus. And the first of the Manus, Manu number 1 of the 14, is Swayambhuva Manu. And now we're hearing, including in Canto 4, the descendants from Manu. At the end of Canto 3, we hear about the 2 sons and 3 daughters. 2 sons and 3 daughters of the Manu number 1, or Swayambhuva Manu. And before speaking of the sons, he speaks of one of the daughters. Devahuti is one of the 3 daughters. And Devahuti marries Kardama Muni. Kardama Muni and Devahuti produce offspring as a function of Prajapatis. And the daughters of, anyway, rather than going to 3rd canto, Kapila Deva is their son. That's the 4th canto, 3rd canto. Then the 4th canto shifts to the sons. After describing Devahuti comes Priyavrata and Uttanapada are the 2 sons. Priyavrata is the elder. He asked permission from his father. I really don't want to become the emperor of the world, but my younger brother, he's very qualified. Let him do that. I want to go to the forest and focus myself on achieving spiritual perfection. So Uttanapada, the younger brother, becomes king. Uttanapada has 2 queens. Dhruva is his son. We heard the story of Dhruva. Now we're at the end of chapter 12, where Dhruva has gone back to Godhead after ruling for such a long period of time. Then we hear about the Prachetas. We hear about our commentator, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, says, here's why we hear about the Prachetas at the end of chapter 12, even though they don't appear until many generations later, is because they're in the line of Dhruva. And Shukadeva Goswami is a spontaneous devotee. He's on the topmost stage of devotion. He's a Raga Bhakta, and he just moves the way his heart moves. And sometimes his heart wants to speak about something in glorification of Dhruva. So it's not chronological. We discussed this yesterday evening at the home program. The Bhagavatam is not chronological, but it's very logical. The Puranas are not bound by chronology. Things are not in chronological order necessarily. There's a thread, and the thread in this case is glorification of Dhruva. And Shukadeva Goswami says Narada is really enthusiastic about his disciple Dhruva. And so he speaks about him to the Prachetas many generations later. But it's not chronological. It's not like he went from this and then went to that. That would be chronological. But it's the glorification of Dhruva. And it's important when reading the Bhagavatam to bear that in mind. Our most conditioned minds are quite linear, and chronology is important, but the Bhagavatam isn't chronological, and it doesn't it isn't dictated to by a linear mind. It's ecstatic. And as ecstasy rises, Shukadeva Goswami speaks. And we should read the Bhagavatam with that in mind. Our linear mind needs to expand a little bit and allow him to be ecstatic because he's ecstatic. And then try to fit the puzzle pieces together because we have linear minds. And how does this fit together with that? That's kind of what I just did. Just some appreciation of the composition of the Bhagavatam. So chapter 12 is ended, chapter 13 is beginning, and there's these two questions, keeping it simple. Who are the Prachetas? What's the story with the Prachetas? And then what happened after that? Like, who was the successor to Dhruva after he went back to Godhead? So that's the beginning of the chapter. And we hear about one of his sons, his eldest son, first. And his eldest son was very elevated. Not exact, similar to, but not exactly like the elder brother of Uttanapada. The elder brother of Uttanapada, we hear about him in the beginning of the 5th canto, Priyavrata. And Priyavrata didn't want to become the king. He requested his father, Swayambhuva Manu, that my elder brother become king. Similar, but not the same, is the elder son of Dhruva named Utkala. He was highly elevated spiritually. From his very birth, Utkala was very satisfied and unattached to the world. He was equipoised, for he could see everything resting in the Supersoul and the Supersoul present in everyone's heart. Imagine that. Say it again. Everything is within Supersoul, and Supersoul is present in everyone's heart. Imagine seeing that. It's inconceivable for the mind. It's contradictory. Everything was within the Supersoul, and the Supersoul was in the heart of everyone. But there's everyone, and everyone's in the heart of Supersoul. It's like the Russian dolls. And there's a doll inside a doll inside a doll. But everything is inside. So he had not just read it in a book somewhere, but he was on that platform of realization. He was liberated from the bodily conception. He was experiencing prasanatma, as we know from Bhagavad Gita, because it's quoted, Brahmabhuta prasanatma. And that's the verse that we're supposed to be discussing this morning. Verses 8 and 9. Brahmabhuta means self-realized. We'll discuss this at the end of the summary of the chapter. He was on that platform and he was experiencing prasanatma, a happiness within that doesn't compare to anything that is in the category of material happiness or senses and sense objects kind of happiness. He was on another platform. Externally, worldly people thought he was mad because he didn't behave according to social custom. But he wasn't behaving unlike social custom out of rebellion. He was behaving not tuned into social custom because he was on another platform. He wasn't just, weird. He was in a particular category of elevated persons. Now, some elevated persons, they behave exactly according to social custom, unless it conflicts with their ecstasies, and then they may deviate from social custom. That's the raga bhakti platform. But otherwise, they, to set example, they always behave according to social custom, the standard for society to become elevated. Utkala was different. He didn't. And people thought he was mad. For this reason, the ministers and all the elderly members of the family thought Utkala to be without intelligence and, in fact, mad. Thus, his younger brother, Vatsara, the son of one of Dhruva's queens, apparently had more than one, and this one that was Vatsara's mother was named Brahmi. He became the king, and he ruled the world, not just, a tract of land. And then comes lineages that come from Vatsara, several generations without naming all the names. And then one of those sons was Anga. Anga. We're going to hear a lot about Anga in this chapter. So Anga was the eldest son in that lineage of kings, so he became the next king. And Anga had a queen, and together the king and the queen, they had a son who was named Vena, who was very crooked. All the other kings were fantastic. And then came this son that was crooked, or worse, wicked. Anga tried to reform his son to no avail. And when it came to the point where it was just hopeless, Anga left the palace and went to the forest to achieve spiritual perfection. Then Vena, being very wicked, he became the next king. He became very wicked. The Brahmanas cursed Vena to die because of his wickedness. And Vena died. And then the summary says the right hand of Vena was churned, used as a churning rod, doesn't give the procedure. It was used as a churning rod, and through Vedic mantra, an incarnation of the Lord was produced. Prithu. So King Prithu ruled the world. And that's coming later in this fourth canto. And that's the little summary. And then the persons who are discussing this, it's Vidura and Maitreya. And I don't need to go over that, right? Because you all know who those two are. Maitreya and Vidura. Yes? Good. Okay. You want to hear? Yes? Okay. Do you know who Vidura is? Do you know who there were three brothers, Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura. Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura. Dhritarashtra had 100 sons. This is Mahabharata. Dhritarashtra had 100 sons. And the eldest of his sons was Duryodhana, meaning a bad guy. And Pandu, Dhritarashtra couldn't become king because he was blind from birth. And so his younger brother Pandu became the king. Pandu had 2 queens, and from those 2 queens came 5 sons, the Pandavas. They're the good guys. And then there's Duryodhana, and then there was a third brother. So the eldest is Dhritarashtra, next is Pandu, and then there's Vidura. Vidura, it's a long story, which we're not going to take time, but he was born as a son of Vyas, but the mother of Vidura was a maid servant, a Shudra. So because his mother was a Shudra, he wasn't given royal privileges like the other brothers, but he was maintained by them. And Vidura was an emblem of goodness. Some detail. Vidura previous was Yamaraj, the Lord of Death, one of the great authorities. So Vidura was way up there. And Vidura, understanding the intrigue and diplomacy of Duryodhana trying to murder the Pandavas in so many ways, he tried to check him. He was insulted publicly by Vidura. When Vidura was trying to set the course straight, some details we're skipping, he was insulted. So he realized there's no service for me here. He just left. He left and he went on pilgrimage to purify himself from the nasty contaminated association that was existing in the capital, particularly Duryodhana and his buddies, his brothers, and other associates. So Vidura went on pilgrimage. In the course of his pilgrimage, Vidura met Maitreya. Who's Maitreya? Maitreya is a great sage, Maitreya Muni, great sage. And Maitreya was highly elevated in knowledge, yet he became more elevated by hearing. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and he heard Krishna's instruction to Uddhava. Uddhava is Krishna's dearmost devotee outside of Vrindavan. Uddhava is Krishna's dearmost devotee outside of Vrindavan. And Krishna was instructing Uddhava just before departing the world, because Uddhava understood Krishna's going to leave. And he was like, really a mess. I can't bear the separation. So Krishna gave him detailed instructions how he could maintain, and he gave him some service. Hearing that was Maitreya. Later, Maitreya was met by Vidura when he was on pilgrimage. And, oh, Maitreya, fantastic. And he asked many questions. There was some nice exchange. A perfected soul meeting a very elevated person, and the wonderful exchange. But Vidura is taking the submissive role, inquiring from Maitreya. That goes back to Canto 3, and it covers a few cantos, 2.5 cantos of this, the talks between those two. So Vidura's been hearing all this. So Vidura asks Maitreya, hey, King Anka, he was a celebrated king. He was very gentle. He had very high character, etc., etc. So how is it that he had a son that was so nasty as Vena that he had to be killed by the Brahmanas? How did that happen? Vidura also inquired, how is it that the great sages who were completely conversant with religious principles desired to curse Vena? Like, Brahmins don't curse people. They're Brahmins, but they cursed Vena. Not only cursed Vena, but they brought about his death by that curse. So why'd that happen? So why was Vena such a bad son from a really good father? And why did the Brahmanas do things that Brahmanas don't normally do? Please explain. Then it goes, here's a cultural point, is that the citizens, because Brahmanas are also citizens, they don't insult the king. Prabhupada points, in British rule, the king can do no wrong. Even if he does some wrong, he doesn't do wrong, and the laws do not punish the king. He's above the law, but it has a qualified king. And if there's someone that's so diabolical as Vena, the Brahmanas did what the Brahmanas did. They didn't murder him in the dead of night or something. They just uttered mantras and he was finished. Finished. So Maitreya is now going to reply. We're already at text 25 in this chapter. So the story, the history within this chapter goes, Anga was performing a yagya, and normally during the Vedic times when yagyas were performed, just like, the initiation yagya, there's a fire and there's oblations into the fire, etc. When there's an offerings to the demigods would come. They were visible. Using Sataputa's language, in Kali Yuga, they don't come. What he uses. Same thing, same kind of language we use when we speak about quarantine. There we go. The Earth planet is a quarantined place for the demigods in Kali Yuga. They don't come. That's Sataputa's language. But in prior ages, when the demigods were offered offerings, they would come and they would receive the offerings. So his father Anga was doing this yaga, but the demigod didn't come and the demigod didn't receive their offering. So he asked the Brahmanas, why is this? Did I perform some sinful activity? And then the Brahmanas replied, we don't know. Dear king, we do not find any reason that the demigods should feel insulted or neglected in any way. And then Anga decided, taking permission from the priests, he broke his silence and inquired from the priests at the sacrificial arena, no, you didn't do what is there some offense that I have performed? No, you have performed no offense, but in your previous life you did. You performed sinful activities. Now, one of the teachings that comes in Canto 6 is bhakti removes the reactions to previous sins, but karma kanda doesn't. Say it again. Bhakti removes the reactions of prior sins. Karma kanda doesn't. So he's doing a karma kanda ritual, and his previous sin wasn't removed by the karma kanda ritual. And because of that sin from your previous life, you have no son. We recommend that you do a yagya so that you'll have a son. And Anga said, great, let's do the yagya so I can have a son. And the yagya was performed. A son was born from the fire came a celestial personality carrying payasam, which is translated as sweet rice or rice cooked in milk. And that payasam, a portion, was given to his queen. Anga's queen gave birth to a son, and the son was Vena. He was a bad guy. So why was a bad son born of such a good king? That's the next question. And the answer that's given is that because his wife was the daughter of death personified. Death personified. Doesn't give an explanation, so don't ask me. I don't know what death personified means, other than it's death personified. And his wife was the son. His wife was the daughter of death personified. And so, although the father was good, the mother being the daughter of death personified, the son took on qualities like her. And he was really bad. The son, Vena, was really bad. It mentions two things specifically. As a young boy, he would take bow and arrows and he'd go to the forest and kill deer, and he had fun. killing deer. And people, knowing that he was cruel, they would say, ah, here comes cruel Vena, here comes cruel Vena. And a second mention is made, sometimes the little boys would go out in the playground to play and he'd kill other little boys. That was fun for him. And the father, so there was the answer to the question, why, and what were some examples of how bad he was. And the king, Anga, the good king, Anga, tried to reform his son to no avail, whatever he tried. And so he became very greatly aggrieved, and he began to consider the perplexity of his situation. And he decided, without consulting anybody, he just went to the forest to achieve spiritual perfection. Thinking like that, King Anga could not sleep at night. He became completely indifferent to household life. Once, therefore, in the dead of night, he got up from bed and left Vena's mother, who was sleeping deeply. He gave up all attraction for his greatly opulent kingdom. Remember, he's ruling the world. And unseen by anyone, he very silently gave up his home and opulence and proceeded toward the forest. So when everybody woke up in the morning and realized the king was gone, they were greatly aggrieved, and they searched here and there. They couldn't find him. And the last verse of the chapter is, when the citizens could not find any trace of the king after searching for him everywhere, they were very disappointed, and they returned to the city where all the great sages of the country assembled because of the king's absence. With tears in their eyes, the citizens offered respectful obeisances and informed the sages in full detail that they were unable to find the king anywhere. And that's the end of chapter 13. And tomorrow we have the joy of hearing about King Vena and his atrocities. So now we're supposed to be discussing verses 8 and 9. And because I've taken a lot of time, it's already 8 minutes after the hour. I'm just going to read the translation in purport, if that's okay. So Canto 4, Chapter 13, texts 8 and 9. By expansion of his knowledge of the Supreme Brahman, he had already attained liberation from the bondage of body. This is Utkala. This liberation is known as Nirvana. He, this is Utkala, was situated in transcendental bliss, and he continued always in that blissful existence, which expanded more and more. This was possible for him by continual practice of bhakti yoga, which is compared to fire because it burns away all dirty material things. He was always situated in his constitutional position of self-realization, and he could not see anything else but the Supreme Lord, and himself engaged in discharging devotional service. Purport. These two verses explain the one verse of Bhagavad Gita, 1854, Brahmabhuta Prasanatma, Nasochati Nakangsati, Samak Sarveshu Bhuteshu, Mad Bhaktim Labhate Param. One who is transcendently situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments nor desires to have anything. He is equally disposed towards every living entity. In that state, he achieves pure devotional service unto me. This is also explained by Lord Chaitanya in his Shikshastaka in the beginning of the first verse. Cheto darpanam arjanam bhavamahadavagni nirvapanam Shreya Kairva Chandrika Vitaranam Vidyavadho Jivanam. The Bhakti Yoga system is the topmost yoga system. And in this system, the chanting of the holy name of the Lord is the foremost performance of devotional service. By chanting the holy name, one can attain the perfection of nirvana, or liberation from material existence, and so increase one's blissful life of spiritual existence as described by Lord Chaitanya, Anandam Bodhivardhanam. When one is situated in that position, Shri Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai. When one is situated in that position, he no longer has any interest in material opulence or even a royal throne or sovereignty over the whole planet. This situation is called Viraktir Anyatra Syat. Passage from Bhagavatam. A symptom of bhakti is detachment from other things. Viraktir Anyatra Syat. It is the result of devotional service. Final paragraph. The more one makes advancement in devotional service, the more one becomes detached from material opulence and material activity. This is the spiritual nature for the bliss. It is also described in Bhagavad Gita 2:59. Param drishtva nirvartate. One ceases to take part in material enjoyment upon tasting superior, blissful life in spiritual existence. By advancement in spiritual knowledge, which is considered to be like blazing fire, all material desires are burned to ashes. The perfection of mystic yoga is possible when one is continuously in connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By discharging devotional service, a devotee is always thinking of the Supreme Person at every step of his life. Every conditioned soul is full of the reactions of his past life, but all dirty things are immediately burned to ashes if one simply executes devotional service. This is described in the Narada Pancharatra, Sarvapadiva Nirmuktam Tat Paratvena Nirmalam. So this is a fantastic purport, and we don't have time for a fantastic explanation of the fantastic purport because they spent too much time with other things. We don't hear in this description, in the verses, we don't hear so much about Utkala being absorbed in bhakti. Now, naturally, he would be absorbed in bhakti, although it's not explicitly mentioned because he was the son of Dhruva. And that was his exaltedness. But he had a particular kind of bhakti or absorption in the Supreme. And that was this extreme detachment from worldly things. In contrast, or similar but different, is, for example, Maharaj Ambarish. Maharaj Ambarish was the ruler of the world, and he had opulence that surpassed the opulence of heaven, but he had not even the slightest interest in it. He didn't trash it. He didn't do what Utkala did, live like a madman. He was just detached from it. He engaged it in service to his citizens, in service to, he was a Krishna Bhakta. He engaged it in his deity worship, etc., etc. So there are these, the picture of detachment has big spectrum. That's the point. One can be surrounded by opulence and not be disturbed by it, not be enamored by it, or one can just walk away from it and have nothing to do with it. And, in different situations in between. There's a very nice example of this from the Bhagavatam, where Prahlad Maharaj, like Utkala or like Maharaj Ambarish, was very detached because of the strength of his bhakti. He was very detached. And it is said there that Prahlad had zero attraction for the opulence of his father, and therefore he was a qualified person to be entrusted with the opulence of his father, because he didn't indulge in it. He didn't get bewildered by it. He was detached from it. And therefore, he was a fit person to receive opulence and engage it properly. Now, there may be another disposition of heart, like Utkala or Rishabdev at the end of his life, where he became an Avaduta also, totally like a madman. Again, no connection with social behavior, social norms. He was exhibiting another kind of detachment. But that's not a necessary feature of detachment. The feature of detachment is resting on attachment to the Supreme. That's our teaching. We'll say it again. Real detachment is attachment to the Supreme. That's Rupa Goswami's definition of detachment. Hari Sambandha Vastuna. Hari Sambandha. Hari means the Supreme Lord. Sambandha means relationship. And Vastuna means stuff. Seeing things in relation to Hari, engaging things in relation to Hari. But if you give up that which is in relation to Hari without seeing its connection to Hari, that's incomplete. So that's not the abject detachment without attachment to Hari is incomplete. And it's short-lived also, because you have to be attached to something. And if you're not attached to Hari, you're going to be attached to stuff after some time. So complete is attachment to Hari. And then there can be a range of how you engage with stuff. And Utkala was way over on this side of the spectrum. And let's say Ambarish and Prahlad are on the other side of the spectrum. And then there's other variations in between those two extremes. A nice example, I'm going to tell another Bhagavatam story. A nice example is Sudama Brahman. There's several Sudamas in the Bhagavatam, but Sudama Brahman was Krishna's class friend. They went to school together. And after some time, Krishna went back to Hastinapur because he graduated. He learned everything quickly. Sudama, they both became married. Sudama was in this total dislike of things material. So he lived in abject poverty. And his wife wasn't disturbed by that. She had a similar nature. So it was a good match, husband and wife. And she was concerned about her husband is too skinny and, too susceptible to, hardship. And so she kind of nagged him a little bit, go to Krishna and ask him for something. I don't like seeing you like this. He didn't want to go. He finally went. And Krishna, on his way back from seeing, because Sudama didn't want to ask Krishna for anything. So he didn't. And Krishna knew why he came, but he didn't ask him, why'd you come? Because he would have had to say, because he's a Brahmin, then he would have said, I need stuff. Then Krishna would have given a lot of stuff. So Krishna very kindly didn't ask me, why did I come? He's walking home from visiting Krishna, really happy, because he liked having nothing. And he, complied with what his wife wanted. He went, but didn't ask for anything. When he went back to his home, he couldn't find his home. Instead, he found a big palace. And then, we asked, where's my wife? And his wife came out and she was dressed so nicely, couldn't recognize her. Who are you? I'm your wife. And what's this palace? Oh, I thought that you had asked Krishna for stuff. And so Krishna gave you a palace and gave me all these nice ornaments. Look at this. So then he understood Krishna's, even without asking, Krishna knew the concern of his wife. So he gave a palace. But he wasn't interested. Even with the palace, it says, the commentary says, he continued to sleep on the floor. He lived very, very simply because that was his liking. But his wife was happy now. Not that she was greedy and she wanted a big palatial residence. She just wanted her husband to have necessities because he was like without necessities. So Krishna may give or Krishna may not give. And Krishna recognizes what our natures are, especially now for those who are elevated in devotion, and reciprocates according to our position. And it's in his hand, in fact. It's just like, this fantastic temple. I mean, it's a fantastic temple. And it cost a few dollars to build this fantastic temple. It took a bunch of years to build and a few dollars. And one can easily become, like comfortable. But we're not meant to become comfortable. We're meant to become worshipers of Krishna. And we should be grateful that this has been provided for the worship of Radha Nila Madhava and the community in Houston that come from all over the place to come see the beautiful temple and the beautifully decorated deities, etc. They come from all over the place to inspire their bhakti life. So for those of us that are living nearby or here, don't be complacent. Don't think of ourselves as, hey, let's enjoy. It's an opportunity to serve the deities, and to serve the Vaishnavas, and to serve the guests that come. And that mood of service protects us from the mood of being the enjoyer. And that's what's being said here. So it's 23 minutes after. I'm going to stop. And I see a hand up back there. Do we have a microphone?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. You were giving the example of, or in this pastime, in this chapter, there's a instance of a devotee having a child, and that child is not so devotional. And I'm thinking of other examples in the Bhagavatam or Chaitanya Charitamrita, or even in Prabhupada's life, where there's children of a great Vaishnav. And I just get confused a little bit sometimes when I hear that their children, or even just other members of their family, like their spouse, are kind of unfavorable to devotional service. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about why that happens and how that happens.
Well, in this case, it's because his wife was the daughter of death personified. So from the mother, the son inherits the qualities of the mother. It's not always, but that's a kind of standard that is understood through the Vedic text. And so Veda got the qualities of his mother that she had as the daughter of death personified. The daughter takes the qualities of the father, the son takes the qualities of the mother. That's the explanation given here, which doesn't fit what your question is. That, so the cause and the effect are not always discernible. something from some previous life. That's one of the first places to look at. And, what was our previous life and all of that? Why would good parents have a son or a daughter that's, not devotional? How would good devotee parents have a son or daughter that's not devotional? It's unknown. Having something to do with that living entity's previous life or the mother, father's previous life or something, combination. Cause unknown because it's previous, but that's a short answer to, a puzzling question. Now, that even if there's some not so inclined disposition of the parents or of the child, that can change. I've seen it over time. And those not so inclined become gradually inclined. Not always, but by good association, that's how that can change. Yes, Sarva.
A devotee used the phrase recently, I'd like to be comfortable with being uncomfortable in Krishna's service. Can you comment on that?
Can you help me? Do you understand what he said? Say it louder. Is it possible to become comfortable with being uncomfortable? That's your question? Yeah. You're making a statement. You want me to comment on the statement? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I heard a devotee say this, that in serving Krishna, sometimes we get getting comfortable becomes an obstacle for serving Krishna. So this devotee wanted to become able to be comfortable even in uncomfortable situations in Krishna consciousness.
Well, the comment is very simple. And the precondition is what's important to you. If the precondition is what's important to me is pleasing Krishna, then I'm quite okay with something comfortable, quite okay with something uncomfortable, provided I'm staying focused on what's pleasing to Krishna. What's pleasing to Krishna is what's the goal and, the fuel in my tank. It keeps me going. And so comfortable, uncomfortable, neither here nor there. And uncomfortable, fantastic, because it makes me feel more dependent upon staying really fixed on pleasing Krishna than making things nice, subjectively nice. It's not about me, it's about. So obstacles are welcome. They come anyways, but they're welcome because it makes me feel more dependent upon Krishna, more determined. That's welcome. So feeling comfortable being uncomfortable with obstacles. Is that what you're asking about? Did I get it? Okay. Yes, up front.
Thank you.
Take the mask down just when you speak. Thanks.
As we trust in the Lord and as devotees, even in the discomfort of situations, does that mean we must subjugate ourselves to non-devotees?
It's hard to hear you, even you're so close. Hold the microphone like this.
In reference,
like it's ice cream. Yeah.
In reference to the last two comments, as devotees who trust in the Lord, should we subject ourselves to non-devotees, even in the form of spouse or family?
You want to know what to do with a spouse or family member that's like not inclined?
Exactly.
You want some practical advice?
Yes.
Be accepting.
Be accepting.
And smile. And continue on course. Faithful, not, Continue on course means you're sensitive to not get in their face. You're sensitive to not get in their face. So you, in such situations, one option is let your bhakti be more internal.
I was not clear with my question.
Okay, be
I'm
clear.
sorry. Should a devotee even subjugate themselves to be the spouse of a non-devotee or a family member who is in a family of non-devotees, say the son of the mother who was the daughter of the personified death? Should the family subjugate themselves to this demoniac nature, or separate ways, or trust in the Lord, or just stay faithful and
What do you
how
do
would
when there's a
suggest?
family member like that?
Exactly,
Yeah, you're accepting.
accepting.
They are who they are. And, we don't saw them off. There may be some extreme measure, depending upon what that inimicalness is like. But, their family member is a family member, and we're accepting that they have an aptitude or disposition different. We acknowledge it, we accept it, and accordingly, I've had experience where when that mood is not there, it makes things worse. When the mood of accepting, acknowledging, there has to be some kind of boundaries. And when there's that kind of accepting and setting some boundaries of behavior that's within boundaries, and persons start, when someone is, misbehavior is often testing to see your limits. Do you really care about me, and all that stuff? And so when there's genuine care, and they see it, they test it, and it's genuine care and acceptance, then that's when some change of heart can occur. Now, there has to be some boundaries, and some behaviors are just not acceptable. Depends on the family values, but some behaviors are just not acceptable, like what happened here. He started killing little children, and that's not acceptable behavior. So some boundaries, and you better have some strong brahmanas around when situations get out of hand. I think I'll end. It's 8:30. We'll end here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.